BioWare, one of gaming's most storied developers, releasing some of the greatest games ever made. You look to the early 2000s, they were on a roll and their reputation was growing with each hit game. There was an expectation that players would be getting something special, something high quality, when they purchased and experienced a BioWare-developed title. In the late 90s, there was Baldur's Gate, a game that is credited for saving the RPG genre at the time. In the mid-2000s, arguably their most underrated game was released, that being Jade Empire. Often, though, when people discuss the legacy of BioWare, it goes back to a few specific games, such as Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic, one of the games produced during the golden age of Star Wars and gaming. KOTOR is arguably one of the greatest video games ever made, featuring phenomenal writing and characters. Then we have Mass Effect. Obviously the sequel receives most of the love as it is a better overall game in almost every aspect, but the original is where it all started. The creativity and world building is remarkable, one of BioWare's greatest strengths at the time. Next we have Dragon Age Origins, yet another example of BioWare at their best, a game that truly took the RPG genre by storm, being showered in praise for its superb writing, choices, characters, themes, world building, and combat. That was BioWare then, around a decade ago. They were still at the top of their game, but things have changed in present day, and this beloved developer has quickly gone in the wrong direction fast. So much so that many, including myself, are skeptical about the future of this studio. Will it even exist in a few years is largely dependent on the quality of the next BioWare experience, that being Dragon Age 4. The story of BioWare is one of triumph and consistency for nearly 2 decades, but the last number of years has been everything but that. The future of BioWare is certainly not a foregone conclusion, but it definitely appears to be bleak, and things have only continued to worsen with time. BioWare is in trouble, and the easy culprit to blame is publisher Electronic Arts, the big bad of the video game industry. They of course play a significant role in all of this, but the issues just run deeper. It's been well documented over the past few years what's going on inside of BioWare, especially thanks to the behind-the-scenes reporting coming via Jason Schreier. One of the biggest challenges that was introduced in the development of Dragon Age Inquisition was EA's very own Frostbite Engine, made initially for the Battlefield franchise. It wasn't EA's executives that forced the change. BioWare's leadership felt they needed an upgrade. Frostbite was chosen because of its immense graphical capabilities and the countless potential benefits of numerous EA development studios using the same engine, and sharing knowledge and tricks with each other. Although, Frostbite was made for an FPS franchise, which meant every itty-bitty tool had to be coded for an open-world RPG style of a game. This created many time-consuming challenges. In the end, thanks in large part to a dedicated veteran team and strong leadership from Mike Laidlaw, Mark Dara, and Aaron Flynn, Dragon Age Inquisition ended up being a critical and commercial success. For their next title, Mass Effect Andromeda, the follow-up to their beloved and award-winning trilogy, strong leadership was something that they did not have. This was the first game coming from BioWare Montreal as lead developers. They too had to deal with Frostbite, a game engine that wasn't originally intended for RPGs. While Edmonton's programmers created many tools for Inquisition that were later used for Andromeda, still many more needed to be created. On top of that, there was friction in the air among the BioWare studios, with Edmonton bashing Montreal's pre-production work and Montreal accusing Edmonton of stealing their talent and ideas. To make matters even worse, in late 2014, this is when the mass exodus began at BioWare. Montreal lost a dozen developers and their animation department was depleted. General manager Casey Hudson and game director Gerard Laney would also depart around this time. Mass Effect Andromeda had huge ambitions. It wanted to be No Man's Sky before No Man's Sky was even announced. Eventually that lofty goal had to be cut, and the game's scope was changed as the team struggled to make it a reality. That initial vision was time-consuming, and ultimately that led to all hands on deck at BioWare, with Montreal, Edmonton, and Austin working together to get this game out the door. It's been said that the vast majority of Andromeda was made in just 18 months, and near the end of development, teams were behind schedule and finishing later than they should have. At a time when teams were supposed to be spending the remaining weeks and months polishing, they were instead trying to keep the game together as things just continued to break. Once Andromeda released, it was ridiculed for its dated facial animations and ultimately was both a critical and commercial flop. So much so that BioWare Montreal was basically shut down, with many developers being moved to EA Motive and others joining in support roles at BioWare Edmonton and Austin. Casey Hudson's baby was Anthem, which was supposed to be called Beyond. This is a project that was first publicly discussed in 2012 and was stuck in pre-production for quite some time. With the collapse of Andromeda, general manager Aaron Flynn was out, and Casey Hudson was back in. He was supposed to steer the ship back in the right direction and firmly stated in his Coming Home blog post that he believed the best was yet to come. Anthem, like Andromeda, had massive expectations internally at BioWare, with the game originally codenamed Dylan because they hoped it would be the Bob Dylan of video games, with people remembering it for years to come, and present day I can say with certainty, mission accomplished, although not in the way that they were expecting. Like Andromeda wanting to be No Man's Sky-ish, Anthem also was originally supposed to be more so about survival and exploration and less so about looter-shooterness. Anthem was plagued by once again issues with Frostbite, but unlike Inquisition and Andromeda, Anthem was an online action game. What that meant was previous tools that they had created for their open-world RPGs did not work here, and they needed to again craft new technology for this style of a game. Even before Andromeda's release and Hudson's return to BioWare, Anthem was in trouble. On the narrative side, Dragon Age veteran David Gator was moved to Anthem and faced pushback to his version of the story because it was too much like sci-fi Dragon Age, and some developers just hoped for something different. The problem was, no writer or developer could define different. In the end, Gator left BioWare in 2016, the story was rebooted, and ultimately, it was as enjoyable as watching the Ghostbusters 2016 reboot on repeat. Lacking strong leadership, various developers were critical of the senior team in charge of Anthem up until Casey Hudson rejoined. The core issue seemed to be their inability to lead. This team was identified as game director John Warner, design director Preston Wojtyek, art director Derek Watts, animation director Parrish Lay, and a handful of other Mass Effect veterans. One comparison that many made to Anthem was Destiny, a comparison that leadership did not even wish to acknowledge. If they had, maybe they could have learned from some of Bungie's earliest mistakes, but they never did. One of the core mechanics of Anthem, flying like Iron Man, which is largely viewed as one of the few positives to come from the game, was originally scrapped. It was only thanks to EA executive Patrick Soderlund that it was brought back in. Following an impressive E3 2017 demo that blew players away, Anthem was still in crisis. The demo, like Dragon Age Inquisitions years before, was fake. BioWare developers were just learning what game they were making based on the demo shown to the public. At that moment in time, the game was still in pre-production and was scheduled to release in just about a year. Once Casey Hudson returned to BioWare in July 2017 as GM, changes were made. Later in the year, Dragon Age's Mark Dara was pulled off development of Dragon Age 4 to help with Anthem. Dara played such a significant role in getting this game out the door that he was installed over game director John Warner, and that was showcased even in the game's credits. By early 2018, the game had one single mission finished. That's it. With developers leaving in droves around this time, BioWare was far behind and running out of time. What that meant was design flaws had to remain, grind walls were added to extend the campaign length, issues raised by developers were ignored by leadership to later be raised by players, and veteran staff latched on to stupid quote-unquote BioWare magic, believing they would find a way to pull through because they always do. Eventually, Anthem released, and the rest is history. It was a total disaster, and nobody could quite understand how dysfunctional BioWare had become. Jason Schreier's exposés certainly gave an idea, and did put an emphasis on the departures, but I think many really don't understand how bad things are, and how badly BioWare has been bleeding talent. Of course, there have been a number of headlines dating back to the end of 2015, when concerns started to mount over Mass Effect Andromeda. Roughly, I'd say maybe 15 or so developers' departures have become headlines, but that is just not even close to the actual total. From my own research, since the very end of late 2015, over 150 senior BioWare developers have left the company. The last week or so, I've gone through hundreds upon hundreds of LinkedIn profiles, being startled by just how much veteran talent BioWare has lost. This total mostly does not reflect those who have continued work at EA Motive. The big news headlines you've of course heard over the past few years of BioWare departures include in 2020, 24-year veteran executive producer at BioWare Mark Dara, and 19-year vice president and GM Casey Hudson. In 2019, it was lead producer Ben Irving, who was with the company for 8 years. years, lead producer Fernando Mello, who was with them for 12 years, and studio director of BioWare Austin, Chad Robertson, who was a 9-year veteran. In 2018, it was creative director James Olin, who was with BioWare for 22 years, and lead writer Drew Karpyshyn, who spent 18 years at the studio. In 2017, 14-year Dragon Age creative director Mike Laidlaw, general manager Aaron Flynn, who spent 17 years with BioWare, and lead animator Stephen Gilmore, who was also with the studio for about 17 years. In 2016, lead writer David Gator of 16 years at BioWare, and longtime editor Cameron Harris. Those are the BioWare departures that we talked about and were concerned about at the time, but as I said before, we really only had a glimpse of how badly BioWare was bleeding. The following list contains names of individuals that are no longer at BioWare. This includes their position at the time of leaving. If you read through the credits of games like Mass Effect, Dragon Age Origins, Mass Effect 2, Dragon Age 2, Star Wars The Old Republic, Mass Effect 3, Dragon Age Inquisition, Mass Effect Andromeda, and Anthem, you will see many of these names there. As I said before, this list includes 150 plus senior BioWare staff along with another 50 or so developers, some of which spent decades working at the Edmonton studio. Just some notable names included are Hal Hood, who's with BioWare Austin for over a decade as a lead writer, best known for his work on Star Wars The Old Republic. He departed in 2018, joining Sucker Punch Productions and assisting in the development of Ghost of Tsushima, along with another former BioWare lead writer Ian Ryan, who left in 2017. Owen Borstad was a programmer for almost 20 years, leaving BioWare behind in March 2020. Peter Wojtyek spent 17 years at BioWare, working his way up to lead graphics programmer. He departed in September of 2017. Corey May was a lead designer and then editor at BioWare for 17 years before moving on in April of 2019. Zosar Shaker was a lead programmer of 13 years before departing in August of 2017. Corey Kolack, a lead software engineer who joined at the end of 2009, departed at the end of 2017. Noel Lukasiewicz, 13-year veteran and lead environment artist, departed in June of 2018. Paul Masters, who was a lead engineer for nearly 11 years and left in August of 2020. Trevor Gilday, a lead VFX artist of over 14 years, left in October of 2020. Keith Urex, a programmer of 16 years, left in February 2021. Stephen DeLue was a QV information specialist up until January 2021 after spending over 15 years at BioWare. Michael Liu worked his way up to lead creature designer and left in January 2019 after nearly 13 years at BioWare. Ryan Hoyle was a senior software engineer, spending at the time his entire career at BioWare from 1998 to January 2020, around 22 years. John Fedorkov served as infrastructure lead on Anthem and departed in June 2020 after nearly 14 years with the company. Corey Andruko served as franchise development director, having a leadership role on the Mass Effect trilogy. He too departed after 11 years in July 2017. Truthfully, there is no nitpicking of veteran staff here. This is a problem that BioWare has. You can look to promotional material put out by BioWare over the years and see that most of the featured developers are just now gone. Certainly, between 2017 and 2018, they bled the most talent, but since then, it has continued. BioWare is not the biggest game company in the world. They're no Ubisoft, who employs over 14,000 developers. Based on publicly available data, BioWare Edmonton employs about 320 developers as of late 2019. Montreal, before it was basically shut down, had over 125 developers. Austin, I would assume, has maybe 200, give or take. Regardless, over the past 5 years, my best estimate is around 250 to maybe 300 developers have moved on, with a large portion of that number being experienced veterans. The current leadership at BioWare have attempted to quell concerns about all of these departures. Once Casey Hudson and Mark Darr's departures were made official, project director of the next Mass Effect and 12-year BioWare veteran Mike Campbell highlighted a few veterans who were still at the studio, including one that had returned. This is not the first time BioWare leadership attempted to mitigate concerns. In late 2018, Mark Darra and 12-year BioWare veteran Matthew Goldman, who is now creative director of Dragon Age, put out a statement claiming that they had put together a strong team of veterans whose experience stretched from Dragon Age to Jade Empire to even Baldur's Gate. This statement came following the first teaser trailer of Dragon Age 4, The Dreadwolf Rises. 2 years later, BioWare would do something similar with Mass Effect, releasing yet another teaser trailer for the 5th Mass Mass Effect game. Like Bethesda Game Studios, who released trailers for both Starfield and The Elder Scrolls 6 years in advance to send a message to longtime fans that a game like Fallout 76 was not their future direction as a developer, BioWare 2 was doing something similar, although in this case, it was to send a message to fans that they were back working on beloved franchises and they wanted to accumulate some hype and anticipation for the future. The problem with that is, what is there to get excited for? 2 trailers which show absolutely nothing. Now, even more leadership have departed, and those blamed for the mismanagement of Andromeda and Anthem are steering the ship. I've talked quite a bit about BioWare's departures in this video, but arguably the biggest departures came nearly a decade ago. The BioWare doctors, the founders who served as the faces of the studio for a long time. Towards the end of 2012, they called it a career. Both had become exhausted by the games industry and wanted to do something different. It is important to remember, as easy as it is to blame all of BioWare's modern day problems on Electronic Arts, much of this is of their own doing. BioWare was purchased by Electronic Arts in 2007, and you could argue some of their best work happened because of EA's size and enormous amount of resources. BioWare founder Greg Zeschuk claimed that when they were running the show, they retained creative control and thrived under EA because of their maturity. Of course, this relationship came with challenges, especially considering the time when EA's Ultimate Team franchise wasn't the cash cow like it is today. EA did rely on the success of BioWare's RPGs. Nowadays, not so much. The EA BioWare relationship is comparable to that of Activision Blizzard's, except in that case, Blizzard's leadership lost complete control and were forced to take their talents elsewhere as Activision was more concerned with following the money rather than giving Blizzard's development teams the freedom to take their time and innovate. BioWare's leaders just got tired, and I sense that's an issue that has only continued over the years. You see, while many of these BioWare departures have led to many veterans joining the likes of Epic Games, ZeniMax Online Studios, Ubisoft, Crystal Dynamics, and a number of other AAA studios, the majority over the past few years have joined 3 specific game companies: Improbable, Aspire Media, and Archetype Entertainment. Improbable has the most BioWare veterans. From my research, I'd say around 50 or so have joined the game company in the last few years. Once Aaron Flynn departed from BioWare in July 2017, he eventually joined and took a leadership role at Improbable, serving as general manager of their newly formed Edmonton branch. Tons of BioWare veterans would follow. Aspire Media is another developer that has gobbled up a significant chunk of BioWare talent, with multiple veterans joining and taking a leadership role on a mysterious new project. That project has been rumored to be a Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic remake. Again, best estimates point to a few dozen BioWare developers filling the Aspire Media ranks. In April of 2019, it was announced by Wizards of the Coast that they were forming a new Austin studio called Archetype Entertainment, and it was being led by BioWare 22-year veteran James Olin. Shortly thereafter, longtime BioWare lead writer Drew Karpyshyn would join the studio. Towards the end of 2019, Chad Robertson would depart from BioWare to join Archetype as vice president and studio general manager. Since then, a dozen or so veterans of BioWare would depart from the studio and join Archetype. As it stands, BioWare is in trouble. Development of the next Dragon Age has been everything but smooth. After Inquisition, development had begun, with a few dozen developers working on Project Joplin. Leading development was Mike Laidlaw and Mark Dara. The initial goal of Joplin was to be smaller in scope than Inquisition, but much larger in player choice, reactivity, and depth. There was a big emphasis on replay value. The issue that plagued Joplin was the other BioWare projects at the time were on fire, which forced developers to be moved onto both Andromeda and Anthem to help get the game shipped. Eventually, in late 2017, most of the staff was moved to Anthem and Joplin was cancelled. Soon after, Dragon Age 4 would be rebooted, with Project Morrison being started with a focus on a live service component. Mike Laidlaw would depart from BioWare shortly thereafter. A few years later, BioWare attempted a No Man's Sky Anthem, spending about a year of development time and a couple dozen developers working on it. In late 2020, following Dara and Hudson's departures, BioWare Austin studio director and lead developer on Anthem 2.0, Christian Daly, was moved to oversee the next Dragon Age game. A few months later, EA examined the work on Anthem 2.0 and had the option to cancel it or invest further needed resources. They ultimately ultimately decided to cancel it, something that they should have done far earlier. Around this time, EA also agreed to drop the live service mandate for Dragon Age 4. This was done because of the failure of Anthem, but also the success of sister studio Respawn Entertainment's single-player game Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order, which EA executives were surprised and impressed by. The reality is that Electronic Arts is giving BioWare everything that they need to hopefully turn things around. Edmonton and Austin now have years of experience with Frostbite. They can craft the single-player RPG that they want to make. The unfortunate truth, though, is that the damage has been done. For a number of reasons, much of the talent that brought us the Mass Effect trilogy, Jade Empire, KOTOR, Neverwinter Nights, Baldur's Gate, and Dragon Age have moved on. Some of that is just the usual developer turnover that happens with every studio and game, but the last couple of years, based on the insider reporting and sheer amount of consistent high-profile departures, it's clear many are just tired of working at BioWare. That's why I've been saying for quite some time, the BioWare of old is gone. This is the developer that stressed and crunched holding onto the BioWare magic belief with Dragon Age Inquisition. Fortunately, that game was mostly well received and did financially pretty well. The next big RPG, Mass Effect Andromeda, was not. A game that aimed for the moon but landed in the dumpster, especially considering the enormous expectations that were placed on this follow-up game to the Mass Effect trilogy. Plagued by mismanagement and some of the worst crunch developers had ever experienced, Andromeda is a game that everyone hoped to move on from. Anthem, though, was arguably just as disastrous. This time the main BioWare studio was at fault. Developers were stressed, depressed, having mental breakdowns, and leaving in droves during development. Thanks to mismanagement and lacking direction or a vision, this game was rushed out the door and became BioWare's most poorly received title to date. Now, of course, this developer is not destined for failure. There is still time to turn things around, but they are on their last leg. If they don't deliver on Dragon Age 4, there is a great chance Edmonton and/or Austin will be shut down. EA is known as the killer of game studios for a reason, and with the rise of EA Motive and Respawn Entertainment, BioWare may be sitting in a position that Visceral Games found themselves in. EA has grown to the top of this video game industry thanks to their Ultimate Team franchise, which only continues to grow. They don't need or rely on BioWare, which makes them expendable. When Casey Hudson returned to BioWare in mid-2017, he sounded optimistic about the future, highlighting his experience away, which he felt made him a strong leader. In a series of blog posts in his first year back, he laid out his vision and excitement for BioWare. Around 3 years later, he was gone. In his goodbye blog post, Hudson stated he was still optimistic for BioWare, but he himself needed to do something different. Sadly, that's a conclusion that many have come to. Whether BioWare's current leadership can fix its dysfunction and deliver with its upcoming games is a question that will remain for quite some time. But for right now, looking at the chaos of the last decade, I don't see anything to be optimistic about. PR statements and trailers with no substance do nothing for me. BioWare's strengths years ago are now their weaknesses. The upcoming Mass Effect trilogy remaster should be a step in the right direction, something that I personally am looking forward to. Still though, from controversial figures having creative input to questionable narrative descriptions of the next Dragon Age game, there's much to be nervous about. This is a developer running out of chances and playing with EA's patience. The pressure is on, and everyone is watching. Anyway, what are your predictions for BioWare? Do you sense a great rebound or fall is coming? Let me know your thoughts down in the comment section below, but thank you for watching. Make sure to leave a like if you did enjoy this video or if you found any informative value, and make sure to follow my other social media accounts for updates on new videos. Links are always down in the description below. I'm most active on Twitter, giving opinions on news that I do not always get into video form, so do make sure to follow me over there. Also check out my Discord for all sorts of discussion on games, and again, thank you for joining. Consider subscribing for more videos like this, and I'll see you later.